In this video I want to explain how the math can save a lot of time for the student compared to any other method that I would refer to as the traditional methods. Now, the first difference that a student will feel on the first day in both classes, traditional classes and the math classes, is that the different methods, they all start the first class by learning the language. Now, that's alright, but that's not the best solution. When you learn the language, then it would be like trying to operate your computer, which is not formatted. It's quite difficult, yeah? Now, the math curriculum, on the other hand, starts the course with the structure of the language. The math imparts the structure of the language, in which later comes the language. So, why is this one a better solution? Because if you have a structure in your mind, if you understand the structure, then you have a very good overview of what you are doing. That means definitely you will reach confidence in your English much faster than by learning the language. Now, if you learn the language when you still don't know the language, your only way to do that is to start from the details of the language. And that's what the methods are doing. They teach different details of the language at first, and then from detail 1 to detail 2 and detail 3, and they progress like that. And that's traditionally accepted as alright. But I reject this. I reject this for a very simple reason. Every detail in a system has only meaning in relation to the whole. So if the whole is unknown, then the details have no meaning until some form of a concept emerges that how to say, until the student somehow conceptualizes the whole. And details are many. This learning details can go on and on and on, and student can easily miss the point of making a language out of those. Now, on the other hand, math, because it tackles the structure of the language first, it gives the student an understanding of the whole language first, in which later the language comes in. So the math courses proceeds from the whole toward the details. That's a 180-degree difference. Then, of course, when you go from detail to detail, you teach this detail. Let's say you teach personal pronouns, then you teach possessions, then you teach plurals or whatever. Yeah? And all this, of course, students must learn. I don't say it's not good. But when doing this whole work has no guidelines, because the structure of the language is unknown at this stage, then the student feels very hard because he has no way to relate it to anything. That means he can only retain it, but he can't understand the whole thing. Of course, he understands how to do the plurals, how to do the possessive pronouns and all this, but the whole thing will not make any any sense to him until he kind of understands the language that he's learning. So when you go from detail to detail, what you actually are doing is dismantling the language. Damn! I knew I should have double checked the spelling. But you know, this time I did it on purpose, just to make you laugh, because you're watching this video far too seriously. Every class the student attends, the English language gets more and more dismantled. And this is the Western approach. The Western mind always dismantles things. That's the rock bottom of Western science. Dismantle it, analyze it, and then come up with a conclusion, right? So dismantling is not always bad. Analyzing is not always bad. I just don't like the idea of analyzing something that you don't understand, because then your analysis can lead you to any kind of conceptualization that is faulty or misguided even. Okay, so if the method dismantles the language in its course, then if the mess is the opposite of all the other methods, then of course the mess will integrate it. How does the mess integrate the language? Well, once it's a system, once the curriculum is a system, it suggests that it's already integrated. So it is made the way that the lesson includes all the previous ones, right? And the students, when they take the math class, they learn the structure and then they make English expressions in it. That means later they learn the details, but they exercise the language first in their own language. At the very beginning is done in their own languages. And so that for whatever parts the language has, for the students to say something, a student has to make meaning out of those parts. So the student actually, within the structure that is taught to him, he puts the different parts into a goal-oriented structure. That means a meaningful arrangement. So the students integrate the different details into the whole. That's a very big difference. Now, when you go from details to details by dismantling the language, of course, a student who does not know the English languages, he cannot dismantle it. So dismantling is done by the people who made the curriculum. And dismantling a language for someone who has no idea what that language is yet, it can be only done one way. The person who does the curriculum, who makes the curriculum, have to fill in with thoughts. That means he has to offer sentences through which the students then will see how the language is dismantled, how the personal pronouns are used, how this or that part of the language is applied. And those thoughts are distant for a student. That means the student at that point of time doesn't want to tell those kind of sentences. The student's main concern is to acquire the language, and he wants to speak it. He wants to fill it with the meaning that comes from him. And distant thoughts are not very appealing to students. Now, on the other hand, in the math class, the students make the meaning, because they're integrating the details into a meaningful whole. Yeah, so they have to forge the meaning of what they want to say. So the class is done with the students' thoughts, and that is way more effective for the students the students have much greater focus on things that they want to say than on things that someone else has said and they have to learn it or analyze it. Yeah? So the students think in the class. The students here remain passive, analyzing other people's thoughts in the book, the sentences that are written. Here the students are dealing with formulae. Those formulas that the students get in the class have to be turned into language. So what the student is doing in the class is what I call language production. The students are producing the language based on the formula which aims at imparting the structure of the language, and it's a constant effort that the students are doing, and this is exactly what the students or anybody speaking a foreign language will be doing on the street or whenever that language is applied. Yeah. So the main difference of the math from every other methods is that the math is regular language production within the class. Okay? Now, the methods cannot ask the students to produce language. So, when you dismantle the language and you fill it in with your thoughts for the students, then what is the student doing? Learning what you offered. So the student is doing essentially memory work in place of language production. A memory work is good. At some point we have to exercise our memory to retain what we want to use later on. But only memory work or a language curriculum that is centered around memory work is very ineffective because our memory doesn't process language. So when somebody is doing memory work as a second language curriculum, then the person is filling his memory with aspects of the language, and this person will fall into the trap of believing that the more he fills his memory with these details of the language, the better he knows the language. But it is not entirely true. Because language is a skill, and if it's a skill, then it should not be studied. And when someone is doing memory work, what he's precisely doing is studying that subject. But language is like mathematics, is a skill. It's not not a subject in school like history or biology that you can just memorize and then you know it. No, it's a skill that you will be using. And if you do memory work, then you have no other way than studying it. If you do language production, then you don't need to study that much, and you naturally understand that your success depends on how much you practice. That means how much language you produce in your life. Because if you reproduce everything you want to say in the class, when you go out on the street, you can just say what you want to say because you already did it before. Whereas here you deal with other people's thoughts and not with yours, and then it's very difficult for the traditional methods to make the student feel confident in speaking, unless the student is very good with languages originally. Yeah, so traditional methods treat the language as a study. The math makes it as a practice. That means whoever practices it will get it. Whoever studies it will get it? Maybe. Maybe. Remember that the whole of the language cannot be taught with these methods. So whether the student will be good at English or not depends on something else. It depends on how all this memorized data the student is naturally able to use to form a language in his mind. If the student is not so good at that, then he can go through the whole process and he still can't speak English. because he can't put it together. He knows everything about the language, but he can't use it. So definitely a percentage of success here is much lower than the 95% of the success rate of the math. Because out of 100 students, 95% will be good at English when they complete the curriculum, and I shall explain why. Here, I don't know the percentage. For the method, nobody can really tell what's the success rate. But if they claim that is more than half of the students who come to them, they end up speaking English, let's accept it and give 60% to them. I don't think that 3/4 of the students who goes to them succeed in English. It's not that high. There are many who drop out, and it's not always the fault of the method or the teachers. Many other reasons make the student quit. So I guess 60-65 can be the realistic percentage. Now, what does this mean? When we decide to undertake a task such as learning English, and we are at 0 point, we haven't started yet, with all our passion, we are convinced that we can do it. So we don't contemplate our chances to make it. But when we realistically calculate our chances, then we take into consideration what are the odds that we fail in this. So if we look at the math, we realize that out of 100 students, 5 will fail. It's a generous number, but let's say it's 5. And we take this as one chance. Then any other method, we will have to say that if it's 40 out of 100, then it's 8 times more unlikely that we make it in traditional ways than if we join a math class. 8 times, that's a lot of difference. Now, if someone explained it all to me, down to the percentage of the success rate, at that point, if I wanted to learn English, it would be clear in my mind which way I will try first. I would not go for the 60%. It's a maybe for me. 95% is good. Okay, why we cannot say 100%? Because there are 3 kinds of people who cannot learn languages, and we have to count them in. So I don't know exactly what's the success rate of the math, but it's at least 95. It depends on how many of those kind of students the school gets who cannot learn any other way. Now, who are those? The lazy one, who just don't want to learn, who just don't want to memorize things. He's sent to the class by his parents or his company, but he doesn't put any effort in it to acquire the words, the vocabulary, and doesn't put any effort into practice. Wherever he goes, he can't learn. Second, as I explained before, during the course of the math, the students are taught and required to produce language. So that can only be done if the student is willing to think. If a student comes to the class and not willing to say anything, just wants to listen and take home whatever sticks to him, that student cannot learn. But without thinking, any traditional method also, if he chooses, will fail. Because the traditional method, basically, if a student is not willing to think, they just give up halfway, because it's too tiring for them to do something that originally makes not much sense to the student until he gets the language, but it makes even less sense to someone who is not even willing to figure out how the details make up a language, right? And then the third one is the originally stupid minded students. There are like that. It's not nice to say, but it is real. There are people who just can't think. What is stupidity is the idea of initiating a thought. It's necessary for the class. If I tell you here is a chair, say something about it, and then you say, about a chair? What can I say? This kind of student cannot learn, but they cannot learn even by any traditional method. And I had this experience. So these three types of students makes up the 5% that will fail the math as a curriculum. Okay. If anybody is not part of that 5%, then learning English with the mathematical English system is a guarantee to him, because the whole system relies on practice as opposed to study and analysis. There's not much to analyze in the mathematical English system, because the students are provided with formulas and then the way to apply, and then they just have to apply, and the grammar is in the formula, and the magic power that makes it work is also in the formula. Now, why the math makes people save time? Simply because of this. If you do memory work, this is your memory, and this is your ULP, Universal Linguistic Platform, that I explained in another video. This is a two-dimensional mental sphere from where all linguistic systems grow. And only here we can process, let's say, the English language. Or we can recreate another system and, let's say, call it the Arabic language. And then maybe learn Chinese also. Because all the languages have the same structure, and this mental sphere is the one that handles it. Memory basically retains. You retain lesson 1, retain lesson 2, 3, 4, 5. You retain the different details and lessons and parts of the language that you received in the class, and then your language looks this way. It's not an integrated whole. What the mind has to do is to take this to the Universal Linguistic Platform and create a whole out of it, and then this can function, and the mind here can function that language, can make it work. Now this, for a student who studies the language, it means a double work, because by studying he will retain the language here, different parts all broken up, and then dealing with the language long enough, he somehow has to do this task to have it here. And that's a double work, it takes time. With the math curriculum, the student is given the first lesson, and then is given the second, the third, the fourth, and then the language is growing and growing, and whatever was there before is still used, and the language grows as a whole. It doesn't grow, it doesn't exist in details separate that is unable to grow here. It's growing by lesson by lesson, and then at the end of the course, this is created by the curriculum and don't have to do it himself. Now, this work starts day one. This work doesn't start on day one. There are different students and they learn languages differently. Some people, they learn a language and they try to use it from day one and they make fun of their own mistakes. Some people don't speak that language until he kind of understands enough of what he wants to say. And some people don't speak that language until he knows more than what he needs, because then only he feels the confidence that he can handle the replies and everything. So this is the traditional method, and this is a double word, but this one is just a one-way ticket. Just one time you do it, and it's yours forever. This one, I don't know. Maybe you need to try a few times. Try this school, doesn't work, go to that school. Maybe it works, go to a third one. Yeah? Now, understood all this? In another video I shall explain how you save effort when you take up math classes. Here I shall explain how the math saves a lot of effort for the student. Because if you can save effort and you can save time, then you save money. And that's a strong point. Now, let's observe these sentences that I put here. We went home. Period. The storm destroyed Tokyo. I go there. The tsunami reached Thailand. These are 4 distinctly different sentences, the method would say. They have to teach it all one by one. Because it's true, it's different. I went home means a different thing from the storm destroyed Tokyo. Right? So, sentences like this, I can write and create endlessly until my passport expires. But it is pointless to go through all that in order to acquire this language, because in real these sentences are all the same. Now from method let's go to math. How does the math deal with this? Listen, let's symbolize the parts of the sentences by the 3 colors. Okay? So, in each sentences there is an entity, we mark it with red. There is an entity. There's the entity. And there's the entity. So, we have one part that is red. Of course, we have also an action that the entity does. And that we mark with black. It's just a symbol. In the math I use numbers because numbers have logic of their own. And then each sentence there is a place, and we shall mark it with blue. Right? So this pattern in our symbolism is a simple pattern of red, black, blue. And if the next day the student comes and I teach him the same red, black, blue, and he already knows red, black, blue, he can make thousands of sentences of his own with the meaning that he wants to say, he wants to put in, he will be asking me, hey, why are you teaching me the same thing? But when it's not symbolized, and you go to a class where they use whatever traditional method they might be using, then they can take you on the merry-go-round endlessly and teach you all these things because your mind is focused on the details of the language, trying to understand what the words mean, and sadly, you are unable to perceive the structure of the sentence. And why is that? Because you don't know there is a structure. Why you don't know that? because they trapped your mind into the belief that the structure or the science of a language is its grammar. And since you have this merry-go-round stuff, and then you have language, you have grammar class, then you naturally think, yeah, I go on the merry-go-round and the grammar class will explain what I'm doing here. False. No. Grammar is not something that our language is based on. Grammar is a thing, I don't want to say my opinion about it because it's not very nice, but grammar is a thing that was born out of the language, and it is not language that was born out of grammar. And therefore, this is what I always say about grammar, just figure out what this sentence means and you will get it all. There is grammar, there is language. There is language without grammar, but there is no grammar without language. So this will put your mind into the right perspective. Now, once the system is given, blue, red, and red, black, and blue, the students understand, and then through his practice he acquires the skill to process this. One class enough for this. Next class he comes, I don't have to teach him the same system, he already knows. I can add another color, another parts, or I can just mix it up and explain to him why I mix it up and how it is applied. And then he progresses class by class. Every week he learns something new, and the maths is not a merry-go-round. So with this, you save a lot of time and you save a lot of effort, because when you do a lot of different method works on the merry-go-round, it costs you a lot of effort, but you're not advancing, because you're not acquiring the language. When the language is broken down into formulas that are symbolized, as I did it, I come across of the simplicity of the language, and I cannot invent more than the language has. It has an end, a beginning and an end. And when the end is done, the language is imparted in the student. So the merry-go-round business model is impossible with the mathematical English system, and with the methods it can well remain hidden, and the students can just realize later that he worked too hard or he paid too much money for what he got. Now, the beauty of systematizing and symbolizing knowledge is that at the end of it, the whole knowledge comes together as a whole in a visible form, and then you can break it up into different parts and reorganize how you teach it, and then so you can make levels out of it. And the mathematical English system is basically, since it's following the linguistic structure of every language, that means a so-called universal linguistic structure it follows, and it has only 3 levels. Then the 3 levels in the maths are the same, but the first level is divided into 2, because here you learn the techniques and you learn to say that in your own mother tongue. But as part of the same level, you also have to turn those sentences into English sentences, and you have to replace your native words with English words, and that's why the first level is broken into 2. This is done in your native tongue, and this is done in English already. Then the second is the same, second level, so it is the number 3. And then the last level is most complicated, because this is the language we use in the media, and this is where the sentences get packed with information and thoughts in different direction, and it gets very confusing. So here the techniques to speak English at this level are quite difficult to follow, and when certain sentences are made in sentence patterns such as present, past perfect and passive sentence, which other languages may not have, such as the Korean, maybe Japanese doesn't have either, then it is wise to relearn all the techniques taught at level 4 one more time using passive and present perfect sentences. And this is not required if after this the student is confident and can use it, but if those sentence patterns pose difficulties for the students, then it is good to go through this. There are no new technique learned here, just one more time the same set of techniques with those difficult sentence patterns. And as you see, there is a beginning and there is an end. When it's completed, the language is imparted and the student receives the value for which he paid. This is not always the case with any other methods. And once this is explained to the student always can know where he is or where she is at the moment, and can find the courage to progress and can measure how much more he or she has to go. And what happens usually is that when the student starts, he finds it difficult to change his mind from the usual way of thinking. When he's doing this is easy already. When he progresses and is doing this level, he takes away the focus from this, and this he does automatically, because this level contains all the previous ones, otherwise the language would fall apart. And then when he's doing this advanced level techniques, then all this becomes easy and effortless for him, because he takes away his conscious focus from that. And then here the whole language becomes easy. So the difficulty is always with what he is learning and not with the whole language. He does not feel that this study overwhelms him, or he has not enough energy, or it's impossible for him to learn this language. He will never feel that. Secondly, he learns through formulas. So some people who put in more effort into the practice, and they're good with languages or more devoted, they can progress faster. In 1 year they can learn the whole thing if they are that good. And so beside the mass being the mass being as a group curriculum, it's also a curriculum that can be tailored for the individual need, to the individual need of the students. Even within the same class, you can teach different students different things if that's the best way for you. And while doing this, you don't have to change the system. Whereas here, if you want to individualize, then you have to change the curriculum somehow. And that's another one. And the student remains motivated and can always measure his progress and where he is at. Because this is not a merry-go-round, it has a beginning and an end, unlike these traditional methods that will go on teaching you as long as you're willing to pay for the teacher to be there and do the class for you. Yeah? So this way you save a lot of energy, a lot of effort, and you don't have to do double work from all the things that you memorized before. You don't have to create a language on your own, because it is done by the class itself, in the class. Yeah? And that's how you save effort. Now, if you save effort and you save time, then you also save money. You save money because, let's say, you charge for the mass twice the amount of money they pay for any other method. But with that, they learn the language 4 times faster than with any other method. They still save money. They still save money by paying you more money. They're paying not you, paying the schools more money. Everybody wins. Why? Why the student win? Because when I want to learn a language, one of my most main concern is that when can I speak it? If you tell me that you can teach me in 20 years, I say 20 years, I can learn it on my own. Huh? But if another teacher says, well, I can teach you in 8 months, then that's I'm interested in. And the price of it comes next, whether I can afford or not. About language learning, one of the most important things is that they want to use the language fast. People who want to learn the language, they have a reason why they want it, and they want to fulfill that desire as soon as possible. So time is an important thing for the student, the time it takes to learn the language. And this way everybody wins with the math. The school earns more money, can pay more money to the teachers, and then the student gets it done in 1/4 of a time that normally he would have gotten it with any other method.